Thank you everyone for coming today. I want to extend obviously an incredible welcome to our governor, Tom Wolf, for coming down the road a little bit from his house and to his old stomping ground. But we're incredibly proud to have the governor here, and I just want to thank our other elected officials that are with us. We have our coroner, Pam Gay, our district attorney, Tom Kearney, also have Dave Sunday from the district attorney's office, and our commissioners, Susie Burns and Doug Hoke, and Aaron Marsicano representing Senator Wagner's office. Just very briefly, I think it's worth highlighting. Obviously, we're here to talk about a sobering topic and something that is certainly not an enjoyable one, but we in York County, and really through a lot of the great efforts of all of the individuals around the table, have been able to face this epidemic and this really sobering challenge head on. And I think we can be very proud, while with the disclaimer, no one really wants to talk about this. It's not a happy subject, and everyone in here, and certainly most people throughout Pennsylvania, have been touched by this some form or fashion. But I think it is worth noting that in York County, we were one of the first in the state to really try to tackle this problem head on by the creation of a York County Heroin Task Force. And that was really, Pam Gay was really the canary in the coal mine, along with our DA's office and Dave Sunday, really raising the attention and the awareness of this. The Heroin Task Force in York County was started in the summer of 2014. And just to rattle off some numbers, and I think it's important that behind every statistic that I mentioned, it's a family, it's a person. It's not just a number on a piece of paper, but in 2013 in York County, we had 17 confirmed deaths as a result of heroin. In 2014, that number increased to 62. So it went from 17 to 62 in 1 year, and that was really when the efforts of all of our community to pull together and have this heroin task force. We went from 17 to 62 to 65 in 2015, and while it's still a sad subject, in 2016, year to date, we have 10 confirmed overdoses as a result of heroin. So obviously we're trending much lower than past years, and we, the goal is to get to zero. But I think we can be proud that the efforts of this heroin task force to date have netted a positive result in York County, really trying to tackle this epidemic. As well, ancillary to that, we can also be proud that year to date, just in 2016 alone, we've had confirmed 70 lives saved as a result of Narcan. And it was really the efforts of the Heroin Task Force in York County and throughout the state to advocate that we enabled that legislation over a year ago. In total, in 1 full year with Narcan, we have over 170 lives saved. And those are 170 people that have been given a second chance. And again, behind every statistic is a number. The Heroin Task Force has also had 75 town halls to date throughout York County. And we have prescription drug drops in all but 1 police department throughout York County as well. So I think it really is, it's not a subject that we really want to have to deal with. It is sobering. It is rather awful. It's terrible. But it is also a great example of government coming together, public-private, it doesn't matter, basically a community coming together to try to address an issue head on. So for that, I'm grateful, and obviously grateful that our governor could be here. And Mayor Bracey, I didn't say our mayor was here too, I'm sorry. I know, usually our BFF. So Mayor Bracey's here. We also have a representative from Senator Casey's office, and Robert Lambert, who is our city controller, but also is the incoming president for Martin Library.
York County Library.
York County Library Systems, which includes the Martin Library. So thank you, Governor. Thanks for coming today. And obviously, thank you for all that you're doing from the Commonwealth side to put the full muscle of the Commonwealth behind this issue to address it head on.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks, Representative Schreiber. I am here to listen, but I want to say before I start and ask questions that it is really nice to be home. This is the Bill Simpson room, and the last capital campaign I think this library had was co-chaired by Bill and me. Yes. And I'm really proud of what you've done here. And Robert is about to become the president of the library, and I think this has been a key part of your community, and I know it will continue to be under your leadership, so thank you very much for doing that. And Mayor Bracey, thank you for being here. This is great to have you, and of course all the county commissioners. Aaron, good to see you. Aaron's mother used to work for me at Wolf. I sold the business in June, but I still feel somewhat connected there. So it's good to be back home. But as I said, this is an attempt to ask questions. And one of the things that I think is, as Kevin says, very humbling about this is that this is a problem we don't know what to do about. But we do know the magnitude of the problem, and we know it affects Pennsylvanians all across Pennsylvania. I don't care if you're where you're from, where you live, who you are. This is something that has probably affected you or your family. And we need to get our arms around it. Back in 2014, I don't have the 15 numbers yet, but in 2014, I think almost 2,500 people, Pennsylvanians, died of drug overdose in Pennsylvania. That's more than died in traffic accidents that year. And I think we need to figure out what we're going to do about that as Pennsylvanians. It's a law enforcement problem, but it's also a medical problem. We have a stigma that's attached to it that for those who are suffering from substance use disorder, we need to figure out what we're going to do about it. So I've been going around just asking questions, and from people, I know these things are often seen as grandstanding opportunities, but I'm really learning. This is my 11th, I think, and I'll be doing more of these. It's just for all of us. We have, John Wetzel, who's Secretary of Corrections, and Marcus Brown, Jason. All of us are trying to understand how we can do a better job at the state, because this isn't an issue that anyone wants to take partisan credit for. This is a Republican and a Democratic problem. This is a liberal and a conservative problem. It's a young and old, rich and poor problem, rural and urban, and that is the good news in that we're all in this together, and we've got to come up with a solution. So we're suspending all the hostilities that normally exist and just really trying to open our minds and hearts to the problem here. So that's all I want to say, and I think, Ken, I'm going to send it back to you, and why don't we just open it up for questions?
Sure. And what's real brief, if we could, let's go around real quick and just say who you are, what you might represent, because I know we have some individuals here representing a lot of our treatment and recovery facilities too. So.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Audrey Gladfelder. I'm the York Adams Drug and Alcohol Commission Administrator.
Alyssa Morville, I'm the Vice President and co-founder of Not One More, parent anti-addiction organization.
And it's your daughter who works at Rutgers in Manchester?
Cousin.
Your cousin.
Nexus of the universe.
Yes. Okay.
Pam Gay, I'm the York County Coroner and also a member of the Heroin Task Force.
Tom Curry, I'm District Attorney. I'm also a member of the Heroin Task Force.
Dave Sunday.
And as I said, hell of a first name. Really.
Dave Sunday, Chief Deputy Prosecutor, York County DA's Office, and member of the Heroin Task Force.
David Heckman, I'm with the Pennsylvania State Police, the Director of the Drug Law Enforcement Division.
Mike Miller, Regional Manager for Senator Bob Casey.
I'm Brian Graham, Director of Operations here in Ohio.
Susan Burns, County Commissioner, and also a member of the Heroin Task Force.
And of course, founder of Susan Burns Health Education.
And also a nurse, so.
Doug Edgar, County Commissioner, I'm on the Task Force also.
Andrew Marsicano, Legislative Director for State Senator Scott Wagner. We both serve on the task force.
John Wetzel with Corrections.
Marcus Brown, Director of the Governor's Office of Homeland Security. 27 years of law enforcement. The majority of it was in Baltimore, which again is a community that's really struggled with the heroin epidemic across this country.
Jason Snyder, I'm the Policy and Communications Director for the State Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs.
And I'm Robert Lambert, the incoming president of our York County Libraries.
Great. So, who'd like to start? What can we do about this? I'm taking notes.
When we started the Heroin Task Force, there was a lot that we didn't know. We had the same questions you did. We didn't know what to do about this problem. But we did know that we needed to educate the community. And as a result, you heard that Pam and David and a number of us have been out over 70 times doing educational pieces. But along the way, Governor, we got educated. People showed up and presented their stories. We heard about gaps in treatment. We heard where the problems were. And we resolved that we needed to work on some of the legislation, that we needed to work on treatment, which was a big gap. We learned, we educated ourselves, in short, and we continue to do that. I just want to take the time to highlight four areas that I think we need to, well, what I am hearing as a member of the task force. The first issue is that, according to the papers in our community, we have over 80 recovery homes in New York. I haven't done the count, I don't know, but I'll accept the paper's word on this. But they're not regulated. And what we are finding and what we are being told is that those people who, there are no regulations. There is no standard for treatment. There is, these many times are people with good intentions, but there are also people who run them that don't have good intentions. We find that the people who sell drugs want to congregate about this vulnerable population. So the first thing of four that I'd like to hear today is that there needs to be regulations set forth for recovery homes. The second thing that I'd like you to hear is that sometimes we can regulate too much. And this is a problem that we are hearing on the task force from the medical people. Now, I will be the first to tell you, I'm not an expert in medicine or treatment, but we have a number of people on our task force who are. And it has been shared that there is the regulations which are there for treatment facilities are sometimes onerous and excessive. I think they need to be examined. And unfortunately, on May 20th, I'm going with a member of the task force who is a medical expert, Dr. Bradley Levin, to meet with Secretary Kennis to discuss this very issue. But I think that's the second thing. We are in a crisis situation. And what we're finding is that the treatment providers need to turn people away because of things like doctor-patient ratios. And my contention is that when we have a crisis at our door, we need to treat people and not turn them away. And if it means extending and giving some latitude because of this crisis situation, we need to do that at this moment in time. The third thing is we need to ramp up treatment. Now, thank you to our commissioners, and I'll say this publicly. They have recognized this, sitting as members of the Heroin Task Force, and we are on the way here in York County to adding a significant number of beds. But as was shared by, again, the medical people, that requirement right now seems almost endless. But what is clear is that the available monies for treatment and the ability to get treatment facilities ramped up and going needs to go full speed at this point. And the final thing that I would like to share with you is the Good Samaritan Law. It's got a great, we've been very fortunate. Every police department in York County, the probation department as well is carrying Narcan. We're very pleased about that. We are second in the state. We have third in Philadelphia, according to your records of saves. But what we're hearing from our police is that there's no consequences, that they become needle collectors, okay, when they go into a house. Generally, the individual doesn't want them to be there in the first place. They wake up, they're disoriented, and sometimes they're combative. Narcan, I'm told, has a tendency to make that happen. And they wake up and they order the police out of the house, who now have no right to be there once they're ordered out, and they're reduced to collecting needles and leaving. The police seem to indicate there needs to be consequences. But then there's a problem with that, in that you can say to somebody, okay, get treatment or we're going to charge you. But if there's no treatment available, it's a false promise. And it is very difficult, according to what we are hearing in the Heroin Task Force, to navigate the treatment. And you're going to hear from some other people on that who are far more acquainted than I with this problem. But if people can't get the treatment, if it's not available, then it's a false promise, and we can't have that either. So those are the things I wanted to share with you. The other thing, final thing I wanted to share is where we're headed with the task force. We realized that we cannot do this alone. This needs to be a community engagement, and we have gone great study to look at how we can involve the community as a whole. What Pam and David have done is wonderful with these, and we'll continue to do these as far as the educational pieces, but the community needs to have some skin in the game. And the way that's going to happen, hopefully, and we're working on this, is through something called Project Lazarus, which is basically getting community stakeholders, and some people you wouldn't think are stakeholders, but in this game, we're all stakeholders, and say, what can you do? What can you do as a real estate agent, or as a church, or as a librarian to help solve this problem? That's what Project Lazarus is, attempts to do, and we're going to follow through with that, I hope.
But let me just, you brought up a couple of good examples of things. Well, one of the unintended consequences of some really well-intentioned policy, apparently I've heard this in some of the other roundtables, when someone goes and administers Narcan and the person does not want to come back, then this is just a small thing, but the ambulance, the emergency management person, they don't get paid. They only get reimbursed in some areas if they actually bring somebody to a hospital. If they come back empty, they've gone out, they've saved a life, and there's actually no insurance, no reimbursement. So that's a problem that we have. But let me ask a question on the regulation side. You mentioned doctor-patient ratios. Hey, Tony. Is there an issue? I've heard in other places there are also some regulatory issues when it comes to zoning. The sequential nature of zoning, not in my backyard kind of thing, makes it also extends the time it takes to get permission, and it keeps us from having more beds.
I've heard that too, although there are people far more qualified to address that than I.
Okay.
All I'm saying is, it's clear to me that we need to ramp up this process to get people treatment.
Okay.
And that's as far as I'm qualified to go.
We've just been joined by Gladfelder CEO Tony Campisi.
Apologize for being.
Yeah, right. So, any thoughts? You're nodding vigorously there.
I mean, I would just like to add in regards to some of the treatment access and facility regulations. I feel that there is such an administrative burden at times, not only on the SCAs, but the treatment facilities, that somewhat, again, takes away from them being able to focus on those best outcomes for the individuals, not only treatment access, but once they get there, quality treatment as well. And as we go from bringing methadone clinics into the area, zoning issues within those regulations, as well as upstart of future treatment facilities in the community.
What aside from that, what other regulatory burdens do you face?
I feel that at times, just due to the amount of paperwork the facilities are required to adhere to, that it does take away from that patient time and that quality time with the individual, that it's really spent being done the same paperwork over and over again.
I want to add one more thing. I'd like to add number 5 to the list, and that's prevention. I've spent my whole life in prevention, and I'm sure Pam and Dave are going to address this, but the problem is a family problem. I don't care where your family lives, it's a family problem. And as you alluded, there is probably a family in your county that doesn't have a family member, a cousin, a brother, a niece, whatever. I believe we need to spend more money with our middle school students and even below, educating them. Pam can attest to this. She can tell you that when you talk to middle school students, how many of them can raise their hand and say, I know someone that is addicted to heroin. So we need to teach them when they're little what to look for and how to stay healthy and safe. And maybe you could add to that.
Well, we obviously have put a lot of effort into the prevention side of it and actually partnered with Board of Education to help us because it was just getting to be quite overwhelming for the coroner's office because we literally do not solicit. We get requests constantly to do the education, which is amazing. We've been received very well in the school community. But there are still schools that haven't really opened their doors to us, and that's been a little frustrating, which is one of the reasons we partnered with Burns Education to see if that would help. I just think that sometimes it comes to just planning the time, you know, that's what we've been told anyway. Right now we're really busy because we're kind of end of the year fill-in, which happens a lot because the coroner's office is free. The Burns Education Program was a lot of it was covered with a grant, but now my understanding is that grant money is running out, so there is some cost to their program. We just had a death of a high schooler here a couple weeks ago, to heroin, and I think that really has escalated this desire by a lot of schools to try and squeeze us in before the end of the year. But we do still have a few schools, I think, that don't feel it's their problem. They don't feel that they have an issue. They might have a little bit of a prescription drug issue, but we definitely don't have a heroin issue. And most of the time they're not even going to admit the prescription drug issue. But, so we don't push, but, I could. And definitely if there's a death of a student, I'm going to push, which I did, and I do. Because, we feel in the coroner's office and the Heroin Task Force that it's our job to try and decrease these deaths, to educate in whatever way. And definitely it's a lot easier to do it at the front end than to try and deal with the aftermath of treatment, incarceration, and all those things that happen. So I don't really...
It's a lot more expensive than...
It is a lot more expensive. But I don't really know what the answer is to try and get schools to open up. Unfortunately, it seems to be that it takes tragedy. Unfortunately.
Well, it's theoretically possible that there are schools that really don't have this problem. It's unlikely. And Jason, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you want to tell your story? Jason is in our department for an alcohol program.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Governor. I come to this position as much from a personal experience as professional. Lifelong Pennsylvanian, Western Pennsylvania, for all intents and purposes, raised in Cambria County. It was 3 boys, 2 parents who are still married today and will be married to each other 45 years this September. Prototypical blue-collar middle-class family. My dad was a lineman for the electric company before moving into management, provided us with everything we needed and pretty much everything we wanted. My mother, stay-at-home mother, dad, little league coach, mother in the PTA, all of the things that you would expect reflect a strong family. And in fact, it was a strong family. Drug use and addiction was not even on our radar screen as we grew up. But later, it did enter our world. We watched for several years as my brother Todd's life spiraled out of control until eventually he died of a heroin overdose, left behind a young daughter. Certainly shocking to us because, again, addiction and death from overdose didn't happen or doesn't happen to families like ours. So when it happened again 2.5 years later, we were devastated. My 25-year-old brother, Josh, died of a heroin overdose. I was, at that point then, last man standing, so to speak, which made it all the more difficult for me in 2011 to tell my parents that I was entering inpatient treatment for an addiction to prescription pain medication, oxycodone and oxymorphone. And so, while there's holes in my parents' hearts that will never, ever heal, they will forever be burdened with sadness and anguish. They do have, at least in part, some joy that comes from my story, at least to this point. I think that it's very important for me to tell that story because of the stigma that surrounds addiction. Because stigma prevents people from getting well, it prevents people from going to treatment, it keeps families isolated, embarrassed, ashamed.
From opening their doors.
Yeah.
And so that's the reason why I chose to start to tell this story a year ago or so, and what's brought me to this point. I could address a couple of the things, if I may, Governor, just quickly. lack of beds is definitely an issue in the state. Detox beds, inpatient residential treatment beds. But there are other ways to treat addiction, the disease of addiction, and the governor has proposed $34 million in his budget to create centers of excellence, which would essentially expand access to medication-assisted treatment, which we know is effective. Study after study has demonstrated the effectiveness of medication-assisted treatment. Our position is we need to expand it all, but there are creative ways, and I know Secretary Wetzel is very well versed and has some very innovative programs that he can talk about from his perspective that demonstrate that medication-assisted treatment works. And so the governor has recognized that, and while we certainly need more beds, we have recognized that there are other ways to address the epidemic. So it's very heartening to see that the governor has recognized that and is moving forward on that. I did want to address a couple of other things very quickly. We do know that naloxone is only a tool. It's a tool to save lives. We have often heard, well, what are you doing after that? Because we have folks who are reversing 3 times. The Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs has implemented, created a warm handoff policy, which essentially mandates our single county authorities to create a process whereby overdose survivors are taken from the emergency department directly to treatment. Now, there are a lot of hurdles in that. Not every overdose survivor ends up in the emergency department, and there's no force of law behind that. However, of the about 10 SCAs who have operationalized that process today, we're seeing good results in Armstrong, Indiana, and Clarion counties. We're getting about 50% of overdose survivors from ED into treatment. In Berks County, we're seeing as many as 70% of survivors. So there certainly are hurdles for us to clear, but we recognize some of these issues. Is it the silver bullet? By no means is it, but these are some of the things that I wanted to address. I could go on and on, but I know lots of other folks have a lot of other good insights.
If I could just follow up on that. One of the things the police tell me is there's a section of Mental Health Act, Section 302, which allows you to go in or to the police to accompany someone to the hospital in a mental health situation, if not if they're under alcohol, provided they're threatening themselves or others. It's been suggested that perhaps some legislation to permit people who have been overdosed to be forcibly taken to the hospital might be helpful, because the police find themselves in a situation where they can't do anything except walk out the door, and they would like to be able to bring people to the hospital, or at least someone who's trained perhaps recommend the treatment would be beneficial to them.
So the survivors will have to go to the hospital?
Well, the police would be, the police are right now required to take somebody to the hospital under Section 302. If there was legislation which said that police, somehow we need to get people to that warm handoff, and the police don't have the ability right now to force that.
There is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So he's talking about the Mental Health Procedures Act, which allows for imminent harm to self or someone else to civilly commit someone. So I don't think you'd want to touch that, because that actually creates fire anyhow. But I think you could create a civil commitment specifically for drug overdose. That's a really interesting concept.
We had a family bring it up to us because their teenage son that I just mentioned a few minutes ago, basically the police couldn't do anything. And the family was begging them to please take him to the hospital because he's going to hurt himself. He's telling us he's going to go back and use and possibly overdose. We want something done. And when they asked him, are you a threat to yourself or others? He said, no, he's 18. And they couldn't do anything. He died a day later.
There is an involuntary commitment bill that I believe has been introduced. There's a hearing scheduled for May 24th. I'm forgetting who introduced the legislation, but essentially it would do for those suffering with addiction what 302 does for those with mental health issues. One of the challenges, I think, with an involuntary commitment is that, again, lack of space. We have to answer the question, where are we going to hold these folks? Our treatment facilities are not secured, and so anyone is free to walk from them. So these are some of the challenges, I think.
It doesn't necessarily even need to be a commitment.
Sure.
I mean, as a practical matter, Narcan training, which every police officer in this county has taken, has said, get that individual additional medical treatment. So the statute authorizing that person to be taken to the hospital, you know, it doesn't need to be a commitment.
Sure.
Just getting them there to the warm handoff.
It's a great idea. And then as part of the warm handoff, many of the SCAs are using certified recovery specialists peer-to-peer to better facilitate that warm handoff. So great ideas.
If I may just touch on sort of a completely different angle here. And, you know, first of all, as, you know, Tom, of course, everything I say is no reflection on my boss, of course. Well, it does, of course, but as sort of a frontline prosecutor, you know, when I first realized how bad of a problem we had was as I watched sort of when someone would get arrested, it's almost as if they were pulled into this vortex of the criminal justice system. And a lot of people, you know, with addictions, where do they go? And we as prosecutors are often the ones that make the decisions. And we make the decision based on offers we make in cases. Okay, and I realized, you know, I'm like, I don't know anything about this. You know, I knew nothing about addiction. This is years ago, I do now. At the time, thanks to these wonderful people, but I knew nothing about addiction, and we prosecutors were making these decisions, basically. And so, you know, time's gone on, and we've really come around, and all of us want to find a way to get treatment. Every single one of us do. That's vital. But there is a component to this that sometimes we forget, and that component is the punitive aspect that should be in place for some of these dealers. Okay, and you know, it's one of the toughest things we have with regard to prosecutorial discretion is when do we hammer someone and when do we put them into treatment. That is, I mean, we lay awake at night worried about these decisions, and I mean that sincerely. I'll have one person who might be 30 years old and his parents will come into my office and say, I want you to throw my son in jail for as long as humanly possible. I don't want him ever to come out because I'll get to sleep at night for the first time in 10 years. And then I'll have parents in a very similar situation say, my son's not a criminal, I don't want him behind bars for one day. And then we're put in these positions where we decide what to do. And those are very difficult decisions to make. But the takeaway, there are some people that do need to go to jail. And I actually, in preparation for today, I was speaking with a drug dealer today, and I asked him, I said, how much money do you make a week selling heroin? And he said, well, good or bad week? And I said, medium week. And he said, $15,000. And I said, and I stared at him, and I'm like, are you kidding me? You make $15,000 a week? Absolutely. Tax-free, absolutely, $15,000 a week. And that is such an incentive. I mean, imagine that. You're an 18-year-old kid, and you're making $15,000 a week selling heroin. Well, the takeaway here is some people just aren't going to stop. And I've had cases where we have individuals who refer to addicts as money, they refer to them as cash, they refer to them as product, okay, and some of these people just need to go to jail. And one of the things we lost is some of the mandatory sentencing. And, you know, I'm not saying we need mandatory sentencing to put people in prison for 800 years. However, if we had something for some of these traffickers on a state level, even if it was around 5 years, to get them out of the system on the street, because some people just won't stop dealing. And so this is something I hear from a lot of police officers and prosecutors is, you know, if we can do a little tweaking in the statute and maybe have some form of mandatory sentence back, that would be fantastic.
I think you make a good point. This has come up in other things, that we have to distinguish between the sufferers of the disease and the people who unfairly prey on the sufferers. And you can't do one or the other. You can't sort of, you have to just be able to distinguish right now that the onus is on the prosecutors too.
That's right. Yep. So that was just another part of this that I wanted to share. So.
What else?
I think Melissa should talk a little bit about what you're doing, because you seem to be getting the warm handle.
My name's Alyssa, and I neglected to say that I'm part of the Heroin Task Force too. But first and foremost, I'm a mom. And I have 3 children. My youngest is an addict. He's currently in rehab. He'll be 22 in June, and this is his 7th rehab. In 2013, I found out he was using heroin. And the first time he relapsed, I realized I had no idea what I was doing. I just didn't. So I actually saw on TV Pam and Dave talking about developing the Heroin Task Force, and I called both their offices. Pam talked to me for a half hour on the phone. Dave's secretary told me to come in, and that began that relationship there with getting to know them. Started going to heroin rallies, and all the mothers are carrying rest in peace signs, and I just was mortified. I didn't want to be that mother. And I realized I needed to get educated, so I Googled the word heroin and just kind of went from there. I met another mother named Vicki Gladfelder at a rally who had lost her son to a fentanyl overdose, April of 2014. And she had been researching nonprofits, parent organizations, and she found one that was started in Simi Valley, California, called Not One More. So we applied, and we were allowed to bring it here to York. So her and I started it just ourselves, and we kind of had no idea what we were going to do. We kind of thought, oh, well, maybe buy some Narcan and put people in rehab, which wasn't the way it was going to happen. But it's exploded. We're amazed at how well it's done, but we're sad that the need's there. We are, I don't want to say frontline, but I have a ton of addicts in my life, hundreds that I've befriended. I'm friends with their families. I have families that live out of state that send me money to buy their addicts that are on the street stuff, so they're not sending them money to use for drugs. We've developed programs we pay to get people into recovery houses. We've developed relationships with every single recovery house in York. I talk to all the owners. We're working with them to make it better. We give them product, hygiene product, bedding, anything that we could make the cost for the kids going into recovery easier on them, because a lot of them are getting out of jail or rehab and they're being forced with having nowhere to go. So these recovery houses want $500 up front. So we pay part of that money, and then we give them product to help them so that they can survive. We also are very into Vivitrol. It's an opiate blocker. It's something, my son hasn't done heroin for 2 years. When he relapses, he does a non-opiate. We pay for the copay for people to get the Vivitrol shot. We work with a few local doctors, because really a lot of doctors don't do it. And we'll help them get the Vivitrol shot. And we take addicts with us. When she's talking about the boy that died in high school, that school did a week-long presentation. I took 4 kids in recovery to that school, and they did an assembly for the students. And they actually got, all these kids are in their 20s now, but they all started using when they were in 9th and 10th grade.
What are some of the reasons they started using?
Different reasons. Some had a sports injury and got addicted to prescription medication. A lot of kids suffer childhood trauma, molestation, or something like that. They self-medicate to get rid of their pain. Those are usually mainly the 2 things. I really haven't ran into anybody that just went to a party and tried heroin. They may go to a party and try pills, but it seems the addiction comes from self-medicating to deal with something that's bothering them or an injury. These kids that we took to the school, 2 girls came up to them and shared with them, and we actually turned those girls over to their counselors, and they got some help. They admitted that they had a problem. One of the same kids that we took, he's a local police officer's son, and he has recently gone with us to a police department. We're starting to try to go around to the ones that'll let us come in, and we're not doing like the whole department, like that type, but we'll sit down with like a chef and talk to them. And the officers that night were so engaged in what this kid had to say. They actually, 2 of them called me the next day to share personal stories about addiction in their family or somebody they knew. So Not One More has kind of become the buffer. People call us. I've gotten really good with treatment as far as what kind of insurance do you have, or who, if you don't have insurance, telling them who to call. Also, DA Kearney has Every Narcan kit that goes out has a not one more card in it. So if somebody's Narcan, they give them our card. And there really has been a high response to families. Sometimes the addicts, but normally the families that'll call us. So we at least start that relationship with them.
The Coroner's office refers.
Yes, she refers. We deal with a lot of grieving families, a lot of grieving families. We go out in the public and do all kinds of stuff. We have these memorial boards that we carry around with us with pictures on of people that we've lost in York County. We've had 3 going around with us for the past year, and we just added 2 more. So that's almost 20 more pictures.
How big a role does denial play in keeping us from getting to a good outcome here?
Denial of the family?
Well, just sort of like we mentioned the schools, it sort of seems like there's a denial. Someone told me denial is the strongest force of nature, that we have a problem that's part criminal but also part medical. And how do we...
Well, with regards to denial, I was trying to think, because we don't have much time here, and what other point that I want to make, I could talk about this for about a week, but the thing is, with regard to denial, I had someone recently say to me, "Hey Dave, I saw you on TV again about heroin," and they're like, when's the next thing going to come along? And the problem is, what people need to understand is that this is not going away, and it's only getting worse. And it's not just the families that are destroyed of the addict. It's not just the criminal justice system, the people actually working in the courthouse. This drives property crime, violent crime, DUIs. It's destructive in business communities, okay, because of hiring good workers and people that are going to be able to come to work that aren't high. The drug dealer that I talked to today also shared with me the fact that cocaine is on the rise now as well, because there are so many people that work, that use heroin, that need to use heroin and then snort coke to get through their job, okay? And he was dead serious, is what I mean, and that's scary to me as not only a prosecutor, but as a citizen and a member of society. I mean, that's bad. And so one of the things that we need to remember is we sit in rooms like this all the time with the Heroin Task Force, and a lot of times we all sit there and stare at each other, and we're like, all right, we all want to do something good, and we stare at each other. And so the problem is, when those answers aren't there, we still have to harness that energy. We have to find a way to harness this energy. And so people need to understand that the more you deny it, it doesn't mean it's going to go away. And that's one of the things, we recently did a billboard contest. I don't know if you've seen them on 83, but we did a billboard contest, and so kids designed billboards, anti-heroin billboards, and 2 kids won, and one of them was from New York City, and the other was from Suburban. And so they're on 20 billboards all through York County. And one of the reasons we did that was, to just continue to find a way to keep this in people's minds, because we can't become complacent. So denial is a huge part of this, huge.
I think another part of this, which is how it started, is with our physicians prescribing these pain pills. And this has been going on for years and years, and all of a sudden now, not all of a sudden, but over the last year, it's caught up with this. And Pam, maybe you could address what we're doing here in York County is we have some wonderful physicians on our heroin task force, and they're actually beginning to educate the physicians. I can tell you, my 94-year-old father went to the hospital. He came home with a prescription for 30 Oxycontin. Now, that just shouldn't happen.
And they're actually, they're the WellSpan physicians that are on our task force. And Dr. Ackerley in particular, Dr. Jansen have done a great job of, they've done a whole presentation. They've involved some of the members of the Heroin Task Force, and they're educating the physicians at WellSpan in safer prescribing practices. Let's take ownership. We helped create this problem, he said. And he's really great.
And some of us down at Vigorous, we're doing a couple things. One, we have the ABC MAP, the prescription exchange monitoring program, so that a doctor or a pharmacist can look in and see.
Yeah, we'll be there when that gets going.
Yeah, end of summer should be up and running.
They'll hold you to it.
We hired the executive director. I think it's probably the prescribers will be maybe end of June, and
what about the corners? Because I heard they're part of it too.
Yeah.
Hopefully pretty quickly too.
I don't know that. All I know is prescribers and dispensers have been buying.
I'm telling the world at the end of summer is when we're aiming for it. But that's one thing. We're also going to the deans of medical schools, because to your point, continuing medical education as well as even medication, not just for those who are going to be specializing in pain management, but for everybody who might ever for whatever reason, see a patient who has a substance use disorder problem, that they have some sense of what to do about it, because this is a new world. That if I'm a family practitioner and I see someone in the family who had a knee injury and playing football in 10th grade, and a good kid, everything, the family's just wonderful, but just happen to have that brain wired in a certain way, the receptors that this person is an addict, and that pain medication that really helped the doctor and the hospital get a good patient satisfaction survey result that resulted in some better payments from the payers. Meanwhile, this kid is now an addict, and heroin's a lot cheaper than OxyContin, so this is where they end up. So we need to do the medical education. We need to make sure we're sharing information, and we have some issues to do about, how do you want to do that so that doctors actually have to look at it. You can say it's available if you want to look at it. So we have some work to do there, but there's a lot that I think we're all learning from this and that we're trying to put into place.
I'd add to that too, Governor, that Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs in partnership with the Department of Health has created, and in fact DOH is now leading the effort, at this point 6 sets of prescribing guidelines covering everything from treatment of non-cancer, acute chronic pain to orthopedic prescribing, to obstetrics, to dentists. So we have created 6 sets of prescribing guidelines. The trick there is getting them adopted, again, as a voluntary set of guidelines rather than mandatory. We know mandatory would be almost impossible to get through. We are working, as the Governor referenced, with Pennsylvania Medical Society and other medical organizations to get those guidelines out there and used. So we have been looking at those things.
I mean, one of the most saddest things you'll ever see is go to a neonatal unit and see a number of babies who are there and who are struggling with addiction. They've just been born because their mother had them.
Another interesting one I heard not too long ago was in Hartford County, Maryland. The majority of people that die from heroin overdoses die either immediately getting out of prison or after they leave an inpatient treatment facility. That's right?
That's correct.
And so I know in Hartford County, in the prisons, they have a voluntary program, this is what I was told, where they will provide inmates Vivitrol shots when they're being released from prison to get them over the hump of that time period, because as soon as because they haven't been using the whole time they've been, they shouldn't have been using the whole time they've been incarcerated. And when they get out, they are, a lot of times, unfortunately, because there are a lot of issues with regard to reentry, which is a whole other discussion that needs to be had on reentry programs, but they don't have anywhere to go, they don't have jobs, and so
Let's the Secretary of Corrections talk about that, because the reentry issue is a big thing.
Yeah, so we started doing that 3 years ago. We were one of the first systems in the country to pilot it.
The Vivitrol shots?
Yeah, we did the first shot. We started mostly with females, first shot before they leave. At that time, we did 5 subsequent shots when they got out. I think the cool part is now that we're in expansion state, you can actually sign folks up for medical assistance, and the subsequent shots are covered. So we just expanded it last year to males, and I think we have about 40 people in the pilot. We're actually doing a random assignment, so half go in the treatment group, half don't, just to make sure that we're testing and making sure it's effective. But I've spoke to several counties about, we have a protocol and that we can share with the county. We've gone through all the headaches of screwing a bunch of stuff up, so it's pretty squared away, and we actually can provide some assistance in negotiating. I mean, your cost is going to be the first shot, right? And then you have to put a mechanism in place to sign folks up for medical assistance before they get out. But it's a real opportunity, and we'll certainly work with Mary and your folks to do that. But I agree with you. I think if we don't do that, we really lose an opportunity. Listen, what we're doing now is not working, right? So
Information has been looked into.
That's fantastic. I think we should definitely follow up on that.
And our inmates already do go on medical assistance. I mean, that process is already in place.
Time for one last question. You want to give us?
Well, it's really not a question, Governor. It's really more, I think, echoing
many of the sentiments that I've already heard around the table here. I can only speak from the victim side. Having earlier this year, having the experience of a nephew succumbing to a heroin overdose. This is a young fellow that he did graduate from, or was close to his graduation from college. We knew he was fighting the addiction, and he had gotten treatments, repeated treatments, as you would say. And he was in that zone that you spoke about where he had a period of time when he was clean. And then at some point, he fell victim to that one more try. And that one more try was a period when he was clean, and it was enough to cause his death. The experience that I saw was this was a loving family. This was one of those unexplainable situations. If you try to find reasons that they're hard to find, they did try to follow best practices, I think, what we know today in terms of treatment. But the conclusion I reached when I looked at all this was that, number one, there is no silver bullet to any of this. There just isn't. And so you can have the stiffest penalties that you want in terms of the dealers. It's not enough. Because the one you put in jail will be replaced by another one. We know that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have harsh penalties for those that prey on others, but that's not going to stop it in and of itself. We need to have prevention and education, and we do that today. We need to do more of that. That's not going to stop it. We need to have, I think, those that have fallen prey to drugs, we need to have mechanisms to help them manage that and make the transition successfully. We give them, from what I can see, only a part of what they really need. And they never make the crossing, they never get there. And so they fall back into the habit. We just don't put enough into the recovery process. And so I think it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, and we need to do more of everything we're currently doing. And I know as an employer, one of the things we do is we have, as part of our wellness program, we make sure that our employees, as parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, that they are aware and understand what's going on in our community. So more employers should be doing those sort of things. Yeah, I think it really is on all hands on deck, because there is no one answer. And that's just the view, I think, from my little corner of seeing it on the bigger side.
Well, thanks, Timmy. We have to wrap this up. This is really, as all the others have been really helpful. And I think, as Tony said, it's a multifaceted thing. It starts with our understanding this as the medical problem that it is. We have put, for so many years, this completely on the backs of the prosecutor. I mean, Dave, you said made a really interesting point, that you actually played a very important medical role in our society by determining, with your prosecutorial discretion, how are we going to treat this? And we ended up that John Wetzel as the Secretary of Corrections, probably the biggest place that we warehouse people with substance use disorder, a medical problem. Then we also put people who prey on those folks in there legitimately, but there are a lot of people, I'm sure, in John's care who really are in need of treatment. We can't arrest our way to a solution here. And part of the things that I think we've got to acknowledge is that we've got to say this is something that's a medical problem. I came clean with a medical problem I have cancer. I don't see anybody telling me I really had a moral lapse there, or that I had to be ashamed of myself. And so I think we need to treat this in many ways the same way, and that's a function of getting out of denial and just opening ourselves up and say, let's get our arms around this problem and address it in a way that maybe allows us to get to the result that we haven't seen yet, which is that we have people who are contributors to our economy, contributors to our communities, to our society. It's a great thing, and we all know that we should get there. So I just wanted, before we end, I want to give Robert a chance to say a few words about Martin Library. This is your time to give it an advertisement.
I would just underscore that our libraries in York County are strategic partners with all of you. And we are going to do any and everything that we can do to help stem the tide of this horrendous epidemic. Everything from prevention to treatment to education to data mining. There's a tremendous amount of thought leadership in this room, and these are the kinds of discussions that our libraries should be facilitating and engaging. And I would even add to that, even champion to the state library, to engage libraries across the Commonwealth to facilitate these kinds of discussions. But to that end, Brian Grimm, our Director of Operations, has a number of initiatives that he would like to share with you that we're thinking about implementing as we move forward. Brian.
Thanks. Libraries across the county and the Commonwealth, we might not be the front lines, but we're pretty close. So it's important. We deal with patrons at all stages of addiction and recovery. So our role moving forward, I kind of see it as a three-step process. One is collaboration, and that's part of what you talked about with community engagement. We're at the heart of our community. We have 1.4 million people visit our doors every year, 40,000 a month just here at Martin. So I implore your organization, the leaders, to embrace us and use us. We've had town hall meetings. We've had different education. We have the expungement clinic that Representative Schreiber put on, and by the way, they're still asking for the next one, so get that on the agenda. But we can be the space for outside agencies, and we want to do that. We want to be here for the community. And then the second one is we allow free access to information. And it's imperative that we continue to build on that free access, whether it's working on our collections or working on our technology access, making sure people can reach the information that they need. And we have to make sure we're getting them the right information. And then lastly is our facilities. 13 libraries around the county. We really want to create that safe place so that people know they can come here for our research. And we don't want them to be scared to come back because it'll put them back in that negative environment. So we need to work through our collaborations to ensure that this building is where it needs to be, and all of our library buildings are safe and secure places. But we're confident that we can be part of the solution, and we just implore you to please use us as best you can. And contact me if you have any information, if you have any questions that you do. Thanks.
I just want to thank everyone for participating today, and thank you, Governor, and your entire team for coming home.